Momentum is a leader's best friend or worst enemy. When momentum is for you, man, it feels like everything is just falling into place. Things are happening bigger and better and faster than you could have ever imagined. But when momentum is against you, it's exactly the opposite. It feels like everything has slowed down. Everything is exhausting. Everything is a slog. That's why we know that there's nothing more powerful than getting momentum working for you in your life and in your business. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the power of momentum, how you can get it, how you can keep it, and how you can get it back again if you've lost it.
Welcome to the Shift Podcast. I'm Evan Weiland, joined by my co-host Matt Ware. We're recording here in a vault at the Renaissance Hotel, downtown Denver, off of 17th Street. Momentum is such a big topic in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
In my mind, the question is, how do we create momentum, and can we do it on purpose?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to start by acknowledging that momentum really is intangible. Right.
Okay.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that you can't really quantify. I think of momentum as like the wind, right? Like you can see the effects of the wind. You can see the leaves rustling in the trees and all of that, but you can't see the wind itself. That's what momentum is like. Momentum is this intangible thing, but you know when you have it and you know when you don't.
Right.
You know when the wind is blowing and you know when it's not. And I think maybe one of the more obvious examples of momentum that we see is in sports, right?
Right.
Where on the surface, two equally talented teams who are working equally as hard, all of a sudden something shifts in the game, and what went from a very even matchup feels like all of a sudden this sort of lopsided thing because one team has momentum and the other doesn't, or maybe another way to say it is one has momentum going for them and the other one has it going against them. John Maxwell, the GOAT of leadership, talks about this in his book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. In my opinion, probably his best work, and I've read a lot of his books. But he talks about this. I don't know what number it is, but he calls it the law of the Big Mo, right? That's the nickname for it, the Big Mo. And what Maxwell says is that momentum is an exaggerator. He calls it the great exaggerator in business. And the reason why is because, like I mentioned a moment ago, it exaggerates what you're doing and it makes it feel bigger and better and faster. And it's like synergy, right? It's the sum of the whole is greater, or the impact of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
That's what momentum makes you feel like. And so what we know is that everybody wants to have momentum on their side. I think about it like this, when you're out for a run and it's windy,
Yep.
let's say you're running a loop or maybe you're running a block, right? Like, which direction the wind is for you and which is against you.
Yeah, it's obvious.
It's very obvious. You're running the same speed and you're putting forth the same effort. But when you have a tailwind, you're going faster, or at least it feels like you are. And when you have a headwind, of course, you're going slower, or it feels like you're going slower. And so again, just another way of thinking about this, but I think the momentum that we're talking about, the momentum that we're going for is to say, I want a tailwind.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want a tailwind too. I find this episode or this topic to be especially interesting, and I think the audience is going to find this helpful too. I think for the entrepreneur who decides that momentum is something that we can harness,
right?
It's not an accident, and they go ahead and study it before they get started, that person is going to have a disproportionate advantage over the person who is kind of willy-nilly about it,
Okay.
or feels they don't have any control over it.
Sure.
And maybe, best case, decides to study it and take it seriously once they've already begun.
Okay. So you're saying some pre-work then is sort of helpful to get started.
Right. And maybe just this episode is all folks need,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe the book. So we can observe this in science. I think that starting is really the hardest part.
Always.
Right?
Right. Right.
Newton's first law of motion says, or the law of inertia, it says an object at rest stays at rest and an object in motion stays in motion. Another way to say that is an object in motion requires less energy to maintain that.
Right.
And I think an entrepreneur in entrepreneurship or in their business, it's the same effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting started is always the hardest part. And once you're started, once you get going, then it's easier to maintain that. But sometimes starting is really difficult, right? And we know that. And not just starting the business itself, but starting any new initiative or project or whatever it might be. So I've heard some study around this that they say a train, like a locomotive, that when it's going at top speed, 55 miles an hour down the track, that it can actually break through a 5-foot thick steel reinforced concrete wall.
That's wild.
5 feet thick.
That's crazy.
On the other hand, if it's completely stopped on the tracks, it can't move past a 1-inch wooden block. Right? Yeah. So, I think that highlights what you're saying, right? Like starting is the hardest part. If you can get past that 1-inch wood block, then you can gain the momentum that's necessary, the inertia that's necessary to break through whatever barriers you're going to face in your business. And so, I think then it just becomes the question, well, how do we do that, right? How do we start building it? And do we even have control over that at all? And I think a lot of leaders, business leaders, leaders in all kinds of organizations, business owners, entrepreneurs, they, whether consciously or not, they fall into the trap of thinking, I have no control over whether I have momentum in my business. Right? Like this is not something that I can do anything about. I know it when I see it, but I can't make it. I can't create it, right? I mean, this is bigger than me. It's outside of me. This is, is my team, are they firing on all cylinders? Are the market conditions right? Is the economic, sort of environment right? Like all of those things have to, the stars have to align before I can get momentum. And what I would say is, if you're in that boat and that's what you're thinking, I would say, first of all, no, that's wrong. We believe that that's a myth. And also be careful that you're not allowing those things to become excuses for why you're not gaining the momentum that you need to have. What I believe is that you can actually be the catalyst for your organization to get momentum. If you're the leader, and you don't even have to necessarily be the leader, the point leader, the CEO, the owner, but I think if you're in any kind of leadership role where you have influence in an organization, you can be the catalyst to create momentum and to get it started in your business, on your team, in your department, or whatever it might be. I saw this idea of being a catalyst, being somebody who makes momentum happen a number of years ago with my daughter. She's 14 now, but when she was 7 years old, you have these moments in parenting that just like stay with you forever because you're not just experiencing something with your kids, you're actually learning something through the parenting process. And my daughter, she had gotten a new kite. And I don't remember, I think maybe my parents, her grandparents had given it to her. And she wanted to go outside and fly her kite. And so, we got her all hooked up and ready to go. And we went outside and we realized that the wind wasn't blowing. And so, me being the rational person, the logical person, the responsible adult. I'm like, well, sweetie, it's fine. Like, we'll just come back later. Like, it's Colorado. The wind will blow again. Like, it won't be. Yeah, just wait a little while and the wind will blow again. But she did not have that same perspective. She and I share personality type in terms of not having patience and wanting to make things happen and not taking no for an answer. And so I went back inside thinking we'll just wait for a little while. And she decided to get on her bike and drag the kite behind her until she was going fast enough that she had enough momentum that the kite popped up. And I looked back outside and I saw her riding her bike down the street and through the driveway and everything, and this kite, coming behind her when there's no wind. And it was just this incredible moment for me to realize you actually can make momentum in your life. I think she just had this perspective like, no wind, no problem, right? Like, make your own wind. And I think what I learned from that moment that I've just tried to carry through and apply to so many other areas of life is I can make my own wind. I can make my own momentum. It's not, I don't have to wait for the conditions to be right. I don't have to wait for the stars to align. I have the power to be an agent of change in my life and in my business, and I can make my own wind.
Absolutely. What I hear is like, it's just about initial energy investment. Right? It was, in this case, the bicycle. Right. And
you just start pedaling.
Energy of pedaling, right? But I think it's the same in business. I really do. To get something started, takes an initial energy investment of whether it's time, energy, resources. Think about when you started your business. Right?
Yeah.
It took a ton of mental energy. And then, a year later, 18 months later, those things that seemed really difficult, sort of cruise control. Right. It was a little more, it was less energy to maintain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, it just goes back to that idea that the initial push is the hardest part. And, sometimes I think when we make that initial push, we can have this big breakthrough moment, right? And that's amazing when that happens. But I think sometimes we have to realize that doesn't always happen, that just because you put in the initial push doesn't mean this huge breakthrough is always going to follow. I think about it this way. We talked about momentum and maybe the sports analogy. In a football game, there's several different ways that you can get momentum. One is when something really significant turns in your favor.
Yep.
So for example, when you get an interception and you run it back for a touchdown, right, a pick six, that's something that can immediately change the momentum of the game.
Right.
Like everything can be fine. The momentum can even be, going for the other team, but you get the pick six, and all of a sudden, just in a moment, everything has changed in the momentum, and now it's going for you instead of against you.
And we can
right?
feel that. Like if we're watching a game, like you can just feel the momentum shift.
Right. Well, and isn't that crazy? You can be watching a game that's 1,000 miles away from you, and you're watching it on television, and you still feel it, right?
We know what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have those moments sometimes that I think happen in life or in business, but there's also this sense of getting momentum not by a big play, but by consistently executing on small plays.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And so everybody wants the pick six moment, right? Because it's fun and it's exciting and everybody can see it and it's this feel-good moment. But I think sometimes what we forget is football games can be won by just a consecutive number of downs where you're just getting 3 or 4 yards per carry, right?
Yeah.
You move the ball 3 or 4 yards every time, you start getting first downs, you start marching down the field, like you start scoring touchdowns by doing nothing more than a 3 or 4 yard run.
Right.
And a 3 or 4 yard run, frankly, is not very exciting, right? Like nobody's cheering in the stands, nobody's jumping up off the couch when they're watching the game. It's not a moment that in and of itself feels like a lot has happened, but when you do it consistently, time after time after time, and you march down the field, so to speak, man, things can really start to change for you.
So let's translate that into business, right? What does that look like to get momentum in your business, these small wins? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is, right? And I would say, if we had a step 1, 2, 3, right? Like step 1 is create the small wins.
Okay.
And I say create them, not get them, because they're actually within your power. And I would say it this way: you can create a game that you can win.
I like that.
You can build a game and build the rules of the game in such a way that it's rigged in your favor to win. And you do that by setting up objectives that are so small that you can accomplish them, you can get the win, and you break down what you need to accomplish into these small steps that are achievable if you just run the play, if you just execute, right? So create the small wins and create them as small as they need to be to actually win, right? That's what I would say. The reality is you can do something to make something better today in your organization, right? Because it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Just a small thing gets you started. When I think about this, I remember one of my leadership mentors, Dr. Mark Rutland. He talks about this. He was something of kind of a turnaround specialist, right? Like he would get called in, and he was in the nonprofit world, in education as well as some faith-based organizations, and he would get called in as a turnaround specialist, almost, when the organization was on life support, it's like, you're either going to come save us or we're shutting the doors, right? We're going to file bankruptcy. And they would call him, and he just had a knack for turning these organizations around, made a whole career out of it, probably did it 4, 5, 6 different places. And he would talk about this. When you come into a situation where there's not only no momentum, but sometimes there's even negative momentum, you have to just create wins. And you've got to create small ones and fast ones.
This is fascinating.
The faster that you can create the win, the more you begin to build momentum in the organization. So, he gives the example that, because these were educational or sometimes religious institutions, he would come in and there would be significant need for facility improvements. They might have millions of dollars of deferred maintenance, because they're on these campuses, with huge buildings and all of that. And he would come in and say, okay, well, we're millions of dollars in debt and we have millions of dollars of deferred maintenance. Like it's going to take time to build the capital to address all of that. So he'd say, look, on day one, I can't build a new building, but I could put new flowers in the flower beds, right? And we all know, like, putting flowers in the flower beds doesn't materially change the organization.
Right.
But all of a sudden, when somebody drives through the parking lot, they're like, oh, well, this looks better.
Yep.
This looks nice. And that's the intangible feel, right? That, oh, something's happening around here, and this is a positive thing. So he would talk about just doing things that were even that small because of the psychological impact that it would have on the organization. And again, that may be the hardest part, especially if you're in a negative momentum situation. This is the willpower, the determination stage. And I think about this, as of the date of this recording, it'll be a few weeks before this releases, but, President Trump just came into office and, on his inauguration day, he signed something like 200 executive orders. Now, what we all know is that executive orders don't really have staying power because the next president could undo them, right? We need Congress to act, like all those things. But what it does, when he stands there and signs 200 executive orders, he's creating momentum.
That's right.
Right? Because for his constituents, the promises that he made on the campaign, this isn't a political thing. It's just the idea that him doing that was a way of getting a small win.
And getting us to watch it.
Yeah, getting us to watch it.
Yeah, getting the nation to watch it.
Right. And so, again, regardless of your political affiliation, the fact is the majority voted for him, right? So the majority wants to see some of these things happen. And even though there's going to have to be a lot more work done behind the scenes, what it did for the nation to see this guy's taking action. And it's a small win. It's one piece of paper with a signature.
I could feel it.
Right, but you can feel it. And so I think that's just an example of a leader doing something to start getting the ball rolling.
Yep. So think of an area in your business where you can begin to build momentum. Like Matt said, by getting small wins first. In my mind, I think sales, right? I think getting customers to refer me so that the calls start coming in, and, and you can start to see that. You can track the calls, how many people are calling, how many deals you're booking.
Well, and that's momentum, right? When people are calling you instead of you calling them, that's positive momentum.
Yeah. So one area in my business, if I had to pick one, right?
Yeah.
It would be. An example that I could share would be creating a subscription plan. It's something that I'm trying to do right now in my business, and that's car detailing. So getting repeat customers is like critical to this thing being successful.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it was creating the subscription plan because that's going to immediately increase my customer lifetime value, my CLV.
Right.
Okay. Number two, but also, Matt, that allows me to hire more employees.
Sure.
But that gives me the confidence to hire an employee because the revenue's there.
Right.
And I can have that employee in that position long term.
Right. Well, I mean, you see, okay, if I've got this many people on a subscription plan, I can count on that revenue coming in instead of it being haphazard. I don't know what's going to come in next month.
Even if it's small, it doesn't have to be a gigantic revenue from that. But even if it's a consistent base of 5, 10, 15 clients, that's a game changer.
Well, and again, we're talking about a small win, right? Does it, is it going to put you on the beach in retirement next week? No. But it's momentum.
Yeah,
it's moving the right direction in the business. And I think that's what's so important with this. So when you're doing this, you've created the small win. I think the second piece or the second step of this, and I know it sounds simple, but I think it's really powerful, is you've got to call out the win. Sometimes I think we spend a lot of time in business talking about what went wrong, what we tried and failed or whatever. And sometimes we just take the win for granted. Like, I did it and it worked, moving on, right? And sometimes we need an autopsy of the victory as much as we need an autopsy of the loss, the defeat, right? And so I actually think it's really powerful to call out the win, both to yourself and to your team, right? To say, okay, we did this little thing, and we know it's little, like we're not delusional about it, but it worked. And so we can build on that, right? Like now this is positive. Now things are moving this, in our direction. And it's interesting because from the time that we're little kids, this thing is sort of ingrained into us where we're kind of taught, whether explicitly or implicitly, that to say or even have the attitude of "I told you so" is like negative.
It's wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of like bratty or entitled or whatever. I actually would say that as a leader, an appropriately placed "I told you so" is a very powerful thing for you with your team.
And that's good.
And the reason why is because your team needs to have confidence that when you make a decision and you give a directive, that it's something that really has a high likelihood of working. And the way that you do that is to say, hey, see, when I told you to do this and you did it, and you were skeptical and you weren't sure, but it worked and here was the result. Well, now you can trust me when I tell you to do the next thing, right? And you may not use those exact words, right? But you understand what I'm saying. I think that they're, not with an attitude of arrogance or any of those things, but just this, don't count on the fact that your team members will always connect the dots. If you're the leader, you're the one connecting the dots. And so you're the one that's got to say, hey, we said we were going to do this. We did it. We got this result. Call out the win. And even honestly, even if you're in a solopreneur situation, call out the win to yourself. Like give yourself a kudos, pat yourself on the back.
Or go home and take the win home. And bug your spouse about it, or whatever, your kids.
Absolutely. And I think this is important because what it does is it allows you to build self-confidence in your own decision making. Which also, by the way, increases your risk tolerance, right? We tried this and it worked, so now I'm more confident to try the next thing. And we know we have to have higher and higher risk tolerance if we're going to grow our businesses. It also engenders confidence in your team toward you and toward each other, because a lot of times they had to work together to get those victories. And so you just build on that success. So step one is create the win. And you have to create it. It may not come automatically. You got to create it. Try to manufacture the win if you have to. There's nothing wrong with manufacturing momentum in the early stages. Create the win, call out the win, and then I just say rinse and repeat. But do it at higher levels every time. Okay. We went for a 1% increase last time. Now we're going to go for a 2%, right? And every time we're just going to kind of keep upping the ante on it.
An example that we can share would be the 75 hard challenge, right? And as of today, the day of this recording, we're 21 days into a 75-day challenge, right? And a couple updates, I guess, right?
We're alive.
We're here. We're thinner than we were 21 days.
Thinner than we were, and we're drinking a lot of water.
One of the challenges is, we're trying to drink a gallon of water a day. I've got a half a gallon here.
Right. So 2 of those a day.
So 2 of these. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for reminding me. Right.
And by the way, you haven't gotten very far on that one today.
I need to get on it. I'm just going over here in the background pouring water out. So a gallon of water a day has been pretty tough. And then cutting sugar is something else that I've been trying to do. But day 1 of drinking water, that was hard. Day 2 was hard. But day 5 and day 6, it was easier. I think mainly because I've baked it into my schedule. And then cutting sugar, dude. My wife's baking cookies and cinnamon rolls and
it's not fair.
And my daughter's they're over here having a good old time and I'm coming home to this and they're like, we baked, it's like, I can't,
Right. I'll just have my carrot stick over here.
A celery in the background.
Right.
Crying in the corner. That took some real investment initially to create momentum, but we've got a group of guys doing it together and I feel good about it. I'm not craving sugar like I used to and just maintaining, I think going back to what we originally talked about, maintaining that momentum is a whole lot easier now.
Well, and you're right. I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier in the episode. The initial push of energy to get started was brutal.
It was.
Those first 3 or 4 days were really hard because you got the water, you're changing your diet, 2 workouts a day. We're both active people, but 2 workouts a day, 7 days a week, no breaks, whatever. That's a lot, right? So I think that initial investment of energy was hard. We felt it, and that's where it's just grit and willpower, right? But you get past that, and now it's I'm actually thirsty, right? I've been drinking all day, and I'm thirsty, right? Because now it's just normal to drink, and so I think it's a great way to highlight the idea that once you get going, it gets easier. The wheels start turning on the locomotive, and it's rolling down the tracks.
Agreed.
So there's a lot of ways that we could sort of slice and dice this in terms of getting momentum, but 2 things that I think are super important in your organization, no matter where you're at in your life cycle, no matter what industry you're in or what your business is. These are two things that I would say you always want to have momentum in. And if you don't have momentum in these things, I would focus on these two first before you do anything else. And number one is this: you want momentum in the morale of your organization, in the morale of your team. In my experience, the morale of your team will make or break your business. You can have the best product, you can have the best service, but if your team hates life, hates each other, hates coming to work, all of that, it's a slog, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. And so building morale in your team, I think everything stems from this. And it really starts, honestly, with your morale personally, if you're the business owner, and of course, if you're a solopreneur, right? Don't discount how big of an impact your outlook, your perspective, your attitude has. You know, we've talked about that in another episode, the idea that whether you're positive or negative, what you carry is contagious if you're a leader, right? Leadership is influence. And so however you are carrying yourself, that's influencing the rest of your team. I know people, and I've been this person who might come in like, I'm having a tough time, a bad day or whatever. I'm trying to keep it to myself. I'm trying to be aware of it. And then I'm like looking around, I'm wondering like, why is everybody else having such a bad day? And not realizing like it leaks out, right? Like no matter how hard you try to hide it, it just leaks out. And so I guess I would say this way, you're going to leak one way or the other. You might as well leak positive energy and high morale as opposed to leaking, the other way around.
Well, and we've all been part of a team, whether it's a sports team or in a business, where we can observe the momentum. Right. And as consultants, Matt and I, we are momentum makers, actually. And we get to observe this in our clients' businesses as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what we get to we have the privilege of doing that, coming in. And a lot of times we come into a situation where a person feels like they don't have momentum, or maybe they have negative momentum, and we're able to help them turn that around. And so a lot of times it starts with morale for the business owner themselves, and then begins to trickle down from there. So I think morale is absolutely essential, and I start with that for a reason. The second area that I think, again, doesn't matter what business you're in or what industry you're in, you want momentum in your money. Morale and money. If you've got money momentum, then that cures an awful lot of problems, right? When you have positive cash flow, higher sales, bigger margins, more customers, better customers, customer retention is higher, lifetime value is higher. When all of that starts to go up, man, the momentum in your money is a huge thing.
Can I get a witness?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I guarantee you, there's not one person watching or listening that disagrees with that, right? Like, we all know the difference in positive momentum in our money and negative momentum. It's the difference between sweet when you look at your bank account and shoot, right? Like, how am I gonna make it? As opposed to, I could do this, I could do that. Like we know that feeling. And so, morale and money, there's a million other things that I'm sure would be great to have momentum in. If I could settle on just two, I would start with those two.
Yeah. So this next part, we want to give you some info here, but it's like, let me start by saying, don't say I didn't tell you so, right?
But this goes back to the I told you so that we talked about earlier, right?
If you're going to set out to get momentum, then prepare for some disruption. Right. I think back, I think about NASA, right? And they're like, prepare for takeoff. And really, they're saying prepare for disruption.
Right.
Think about the pilots strapped down in the cockpit, right? And they're like shaking, and they got their oxygen masks on.
Right.
That's nothing but disruption. But they're about to get momentum. They're about to fly into outer space here, right? I like what Myron Golden says, right? He's a business coach consultant. He says that disruption always follows intention. So, again, don't say we didn't tell you so.
Right. And I would say this, a leader's job is to be a disruptor. That's actually what you're supposed to do. A disruption is a change, and a leader is a change agent. If you don't need change, you actually don't need leadership, right? People can maintain status quo all by themselves. You need leadership when something has to change, when something needs to be disrupted. And so I would say if I'm not changing things, I'm not leading. If I'm not disrupting things, I'm not leading. If I'm allowing status quo to happen, I'm not doing my job as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. To get momentum, it requires disruption. It requires somebody coming in and saying, I am going to be a momentum maker.
Yep. And I don't mind being a momentum maker.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's for myself, now that I know that I can do it intentionally.
Right.
Or it's helping a client. Dude, it's so fun to see people get momentum.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing out here.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when we talk about this, it reminds us, in our own lives and our own businesses, because everybody falls into the trap of thinking like, I'm a victim of my circumstances, right? and we can all feel the slog of just doing business day to day. And I think, even talking about this today kind of energizes me a little bit to say, I've got to go make some momentum, in some things in my life. Because, again, just kind of going back to, and as we're wrapping up the episode, it really is your best friend.
Yep.
Right? Like when momentum is for you, things just go better.
Yep.
Yeah. And it feels good. So we got to create the small wins.
Yep.
We got to call out those small wins, and then we just build on them and do it over and over and over again.
Yeah. If you don't feel like you have wind in your sails and you don't know where to start, get in touch. Matt and I love this stuff. We coach and consult business owners on how to get momentum again. You can get in touch with us using our contact info in the show notes, in the description of this video. That's it for this episode of the Shift Podcast. We hope it was helpful. Go out there, get momentum today, now that you know that you can get it on purpose. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.